Hey guys, before we get into this video, I just got to make one quick announcement. Now obviously I would love for my YouTube channel to be as successful as anyone else who takes the time to do this. But due to the outrageous censorship and delisting that's been dominating this platform lately, I've become kind of concerned for the future of this channel. Within my first 2 months of operation here at Fallen World Films, I've already received 1 strike, followed by a week suspension. And my second documentary was only available on YouTube for like 15 minutes before being permanently blocked. So I appreciate the opportunity that YouTube has given me, and I do try to respect their community guidelines here. But for this reason, I gotta let you guys know that my videos can also be found on BITCHUTE.com, Brighteon.com, and BrandNewTube.com, where my speech isn't censored and you don't have to sit through annoying disclaimers like this one. So I've linked those channels below. Please consider subscribing to Fallen World Films on any of these channels as well, just in case I happen to disappear from this platform one day. And with that said, I don't want to waste any more of your time, so let's get on with the show.
And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
The beast you talk about, was he the one who goes around marking people? My grandmother told me about a lot of terrible things that are supposed to happen.
The mark of the beast is talked about, Patty. It's probably some kind of identification mark based on the number 666. It says in the Bible that people won't be able to buy or sell anything without it. Kind of a super evil credit card, only it'll be on your hand or forehead.
I wouldn't let anybody tattoo my forehead.
When Elias Brotberger goes to work, he doesn't need ID. And he doesn't need money. In fact, much of what he needs to get through the day is hidden right there, just below the surface, in his hand.
Like to touch it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, weird. Yeah, it's like a grain of rice.
Yeah, a grain of rice.
Embedded in his hand is a microchip that serves as his keys, his ID, and his wallet. In Sweden, the microchips are already here.
The microchip implants use the same technology that's in contactless credit cards,
which have made cash pretty much obsolete.
The whole agenda is to create a one-world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is giving me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish.
And it has an antenna and some sensors embedded in it. And what we plan to do is work with them to advance a tattoo that could be used for authentication. Now, it may be true that 10 to 20-year-olds don't want to wear a watch on their wrist, but you can be sure that they'll be far more interested in wearing an electronic tattoo, if only to piss off their parents. Right?
Wouldn't let anybody tattoo my forehead.
Let's say you're grabbing your favorite coffee beverage, or heading into the office, or checking out. Just hover your palm and you're on your way. It's as easy as that. Since your palm is unique and can't be lost or misplaced, you can get things done quickly and securely. Enter, identify, and pay with Amazon One. Identify, identify, enter, and pay. Identify, enter, and pay.
And all money will be in your chips. And so instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. If they say you owe us this much money in taxes, they just deduct it out of your chip digitally. Total control. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, you can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything.
What's the issue here, Hannah?
Intimidation and profanity.
Oh, no, I was not intimidating.
Don't speak, ma'am.
I was just trying to...
Okay, so, in order to restore calm, I'm invoking my authority as airport security to dock you 1 full ranking point as a punitive measure. This is a temporary measure.
No!
The score reverts to normal in 24 hours.
No, but I need it now.
Period, all down votes are subject to a ×2 multiplier.
×2?
We recommend you avoid negative feedback at this time.
I'm on double damage?
Please, remove yourself from the airport immediately.
So what can you say about the year 2020? Besides that it came in like a pickup truck being operated by a drunk man smashing through the front entrance of a gas station. You know, it started off all right. The economy was looking pretty good. Things were okay at first. And yeah, sure, we were reading news headlines and articles about this growing threat of a certain virus that I'm not allowed to speak about. But for the sake of blind compliance, let's just call it the agenda virus. Or actually, let's just call it the thing. Anyways, we knew about the thing by the turn of 2020, but I don't recall ever feeling really concerned about it. I mean, it's not like we hadn't persevered through similar things in the past. You know, but things didn't start really seeming weird until the lockdown started. And I still remember sitting in my buddy's truck as we were listening to the governor of Illinois announce the enforcement of a statewide shutdown. You know, and none of this made any sense to us based on our own observation. I mean, there were no bodies in the streets, there was no gruesome flesh-eating bacteria thing, no other terrible threat that would reasonably necessitate such sweeping measures like those that were imposed in these lockdowns. You know, I mean, maybe if there was people dying and coming back as zombies, then I would expect for doors to be boarded up and playgrounds to be taped off and all that. But for this, you know, and even as these lockdowns and restrictions were being imposed, we were being fed statistics that weren't even scary. I mean, less than 1% of people were actually dying from the thing. And yet we were forced to close down our schools and our businesses and our recreational events and even our churches. And there we were, wandering through a hometown that we no longer even recognized, surrounded by neighbors that we no longer speak with or even smile at behind these masks. You know, and a lot of us were clever enough to understand that these regulations were being promoted to serve some political purpose. But yet still, there we were wearing those masks, you know, standing on the X's, and all the while acknowledging that we're losing these freedoms as we complicitly oblige, you know, and even participate in the stripping of these freedoms. But you know, all the while something was being built before the backdrop of all this chaos. Behind the scenes of the riots in the streets and the cities burning to the ground and entire communities going out of business, or literal murder hornets buzzing in front of your face. And behind the scenes of the cancel culture and the deplatforming and the censorship and the disinfo campaigns, the execution of an intricate plan is underway, and they're calling it the Great Reset, an agenda whose name pretty much says it all. I mean, it's no coincidence that this year has been plastered with the symbolism of the phoenix, because the phoenix needs to rise out of something, and it's ashes, you know. That's the new normal, the Great Reset. You get it? Something new comes from something that's been destroyed. But this video is not about the Great Reset, but rather just one facet of the Great Reset, which is ID 2020, and the plan to combine the global VACC-ination campaign of GAVI with the global digital identity campaign of ID 2020, and to not only inject the world's population, but to capture the identity of the world's population simultaneously. But hey, at least it's not mandatory, right?
It is fair to say things won't go back to truly normal until we have a vaccine that we've gotten out to basically the entire world.
And to paint this picture for you, I got to take you back to the beginning of this horrible year, before the riots, and before the hurricanes and wildfires, and before the animal die-offs, and before the business closures. And yes, even before the murder hornets, all the way back to March 13th of this year, when Bill Gates officially stepped down from his administrative role at Microsoft to dedicate more time to his so-called philanthropic work through the organization he runs with his wife, Melinda, who, by the way, happens to look a lot like Robin Williams playing the role of Mrs. Doubtfire. But anyways, their organization is called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And now, when Bill Gates says that he wants to pursue his philanthropic interests, please understand that Bill and Melinda's idea of philanthropy includes things like the promotion of GMOs and chemical-based agriculture and big pharma and shots. Of course, reproductive health care. And I think you know what that means. So yeah, Bill and Melinda kind of take a Bond villain approach to philanthropy. And when Bill left Microsoft, I remember reading a headline about it, and my interest was just oddly piqued for some reason. I mean, it's not like I was staying up to date with whatever Bill Gates is up to, but somehow I just sensed that something significant was occurring. And at that time, early March of this year, America hadn't really been ravished by the thing yet, but the media was just starting to buzz about it. And I obviously knew that Bill was among the world's most prominent advocates for... And I made a quick and inherent connection between his retirement from Microsoft and this coming event, which hadn't even unfolded yet. And at this time, Americans were only reading about the thing in context to what was going on in other countries. But it hadn't really crossed our borders. Don't ask me how, but I just knew that when the thing finally came to America, that Bill Gates would somehow be rolled out as some type of hero and savior. So you can imagine my response when that exact thing proceeded to occur. And I was researching Gates after he stepped down from Microsoft, and I was trying to see which type of projects that he had in mind as he departed, you know, claiming that he was going to pursue philanthropic interests of his. And it was during this light research that I discovered his involvement in something called ID2020, which we're going to get into a little bit, as well as something else that I find even far more disturbing, which is a strange patent that was filed by Microsoft shortly before Bill's departure. And this patent is titled Cryptocurrency System Using Body Activity Data. And you will not believe the patent number on this, but I kid you not, it's WO 2020 060606. And unfortunately, I already know that this is going to have to be a two-part video series, I guess, because I got too much to talk about with ID 2020. And this patent thing definitely deserves a video of its own. So stay tuned, because hopefully next week we'll be getting into that. ID 2020 stands for Identification 2020, obviously. And it's an organization that refer to themselves as an alliance, which includes a partnership with all the exact people that you'd expect me to say right now. So we'll just summarize it and say that they're partnered with the United Nations. And the crux of this initiative is to ensure that every single citizen of the planet Earth has a digital identity that is registered and archived online, along with everyone else who is already subscribed to this new beast system, like you and me, and anyone else that's ever used the internet. And I'm sorry to, jar you with provocative language like beast system, but as we continue, I think you'll start to get it, because there's some seriously creepy biblical connections here. This is the secular world we're talking about. And there are famously powerful people in elite positions of authority who have outspokenly endorsed the notion of not only collecting the digital identity of every living human, but also monitoring the life and behaviors of every living human. So here's the non-skeptical explanation for ID 2020. Every person who has interacted with the internet has established some level of digital identity, okay? Or digital footprint. And unbeknownst to us, these digital identifiers are being used and sold and measured by various companies and organizations. And this personal digital information is currently stored in these silos. And ID 2020 is the hero of the day, who's going to take back the power from these digital systems and return them to us, the rightful digital identity owners, I guess. And all over their website, they try to beg the point that over 1 billion humans still don't have a digital identity. And therefore, those people can't interact with this new online version of reality. And maybe they present difficulties to the modern automated systems of banking and insurance and things like that. And this apparently is such a big problem that we need to get the Rockefeller Foundation and the Gates Foundation and Microsoft and all these different megalithic elitist organizations together so that we can track down and identify every last human because, those lost tribes of the rainforests, they're getting lost out there in the jungle. So it'd be really good to get them some access to Google Maps, I guess. And if they ever happen to come by a computer, this way they could create a Facebook account or something. There is a concerning article on the certification page of the ID2020 website because it details the official launch of the ID2020 certification mark. And no, I'm not talking about the word mark. A certification mark represents a criteria of regulations and standards that a product is expected to meet. So if a product is labeled with a certification mark, that would indicate that it's compliant to all these standards. And so when you have something like ID2020 presenting a certification mark of compliance, which they did at the World Economic Forum in Davos, by the way, well, that means that they're taking this thing really seriously. And if this was some regular business, I guess that wouldn't be an issue. I mean, I like for the products that I spend my money on to undergo some level of quality control. And when I see the certification mark on my new computer, I say, cool, this thing works. However, ID2020 does not produce a product. ID2020 only pursues a goal that includes identifying every human and managing this connection through some form of device. And really, this connection could be established through a variety of devices. I mean, everything from a smartphone or computer to these human-embedded microchips that are in production. But portability seems to be a really important facet to this ID2020 plan. And they're pushing to start this initiative, in these impoverished countries, a lot of which don't even have internet access. So unless the plan entails to, pass out free smartphones and build towers in these locations, perhaps the suggestion of the microchip isn't really all that far-fetched. And even though at Davos this certification mark was presented to businesses, so that ID2020 compliant companies could begin to identify themselves as such, is it really beyond the scope of sensibility that such a mark could be stamped on compliant citizens as well in the future? And biblically speaking, I think by all means, the mark of the beast will serve the same purpose to the Antichrist that these certification marks represent, compliance. But of all this crazy stuff, I think the most disturbing aspect of ID2020, outside of their entire existence, of course, would be their affiliation with GAVI, or AKA the V-Word Alliance, which, by the way, is yet another organization funded largely by the Gates Foundation. And for a guy who's trying to see if ID2020 could possibly have anything to do with the future implementation of this mark of the beast, and assuming that the people behind ID2020 didn't want for people to consider that conclusion, well, this doesn't bode well for them. Because the fact that one of their main contributors and business partners is GAVI, for crying out loud, not to mention the Gates Foundation or Microsoft. And look who else is their partner. So yeah, the usual suspects. And anyways, the CEO of GAVI is Seth Berkley. Okay, and here's one out of many similar articles that was written by Dr. Berkley himself, and this one was published back in 2017 for Nature.com. All right, other projects help to inform us of who receives. We are working with a company in India called Kushi Baby, which creates off-grid digital health records. A necklace worn by infants contains a unique identification number on a short-range communication chip. Community health workers can scan the chip using a mobile phone, enabling them to update a child's digital record even in remote areas with little phone coverage. And so what, are these babies going to wear these necklaces their whole lives? Do they get new digital necklaces every time their neck grows? Or is this just a soft implementation for something that will soon change forms? How reliable is a necklace compared to a silicone microchip, which again are already in production and already being encouraged for this type of use? And anyways, it just reminds me a lot of this. Here's a PDF that's available through ID2020.org. And apparently there was a request for information regarding Bangladesh. And I don't know all the details, but if you just look at the second portion of this first paragraph here, it says A2I and its partners GAVI and ID2020 are committed to jointly researching and implementing a unique ID for infants through digitization of processes in Bangladesh. The program will provide infants and children with a portable, biometrically linked digital ID, either at the point of birth registration or at the time of their immunizations. So, that's not creepy at all. And something you really need to understand about this ID 2020 is that it goes directly hand in hand with the Agenda 2030 initiative. And if you do some follow-up research after watching this video and check out the ID2020 website yourself, which, by the way, I suggest you do. You know, never just take my word for this stuff. Do your own research. It's pretty easy. You just got to look for it. But you're going to see the words Sustainable Development Goals all over the website. And, of course, these Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as they're commonly called, are referring to the United Nations Agenda 2030 plan and their infamous list of these specific goals that the nations of this world are expected to comply with, so that come the year 2030, we can have a new world order to live in. Okay, and here's an example of that right on their website. Right in this section, it says, a fundamental and universal human right. Article 6 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights stipulates that everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. The Sustainable Development Goals, 2015 to 2030, this is Agenda 2030, include Target 16.9, which aims to, quote, provide legal identity to all, including birth registration by 2030. So clearly it's not like ID 2020 just spontaneously emerged onto the scene, you know, complete with a proposed solution to this supposed problem of having so many humans on Earth that don't have a digital identity yet. More likely, ID 2020 is yet just another appendage of the United Nations, would be my guess. And this is just yet another organization that was created to move along this particular sustainability goal. And now I'm sure that there's a lot of people that would disagree with that assertion and say that there is no nefarious motive for ID 2020. Or for the idea of urgently insisting that all living men must be digitally cataloged and trackable. These are the same type of people who will visit the ID 2020 website, which I'll link below, by the way, and come away saying something really naive like, well, hey, they say themselves that they respect privacy, so this is, you know, all about privacy. And there will also be skeptics on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, you know, born-again Christians and good Bible-believing Christians who will say, there's no biblical precedent to support the idea that the mark of the beast will be used to track or, you know, to document people. And I get all that, I really do. I mean, I've labored over the proper interpretation of these scriptures for years, and I've considered every popular conception. I mean, Seventh-day Adventists who believe that Sunday worship is the mark of the beast, but some Christians who think that the mark is merely a reference to the coins of ancient Rome that bear the likeness to Caesar and other emperors. You know, and then they say that Nero himself, that the numerical value of his name breaks down to 666. Nero, of course, being the infamously evil emperor who killed multitudes and persecuted the early church. But anyways, I don't believe in gematria, and despite adequate research into all these various predictions, I think the Bible means what the Bible says. I think it's literal. After all, it almost always turns out to be literal when it comes to the scriptures. And anyways, most of the alternative perspectives regarding this prophecy were concocted in a generation where the notion of worldwide communications and global armies seemed impossible to theologians at that time. There was simply no existing technology to indicate the possibility of something like radio signals or internet or something like that. And so many credible theologians and biblical historians did what seemed reasonable at their time and adapted the text to a message that they could comprehend. But it's 2020 now, and when the Bible says in Revelation that every man and child, rich and poor, and prisoners and politicians alike, I'm paraphrasing there, but that everybody one day will be forced to receive some type of physical mark into their hand or forehead, which will enable them to buy or sell, well, that makes sense. That technology is already here. I mean, heck, I have friends that advocate for such a system today. I mean, we're so primed and conditioned for this type of mark. We are 4 generations deep into credit cards now, buying real stuff with imaginary money. Money which is connected to our name and therefore our social security number and therefore our legal identity. 4 generations. Today it's to the point that a Gmail account serves as the golden ticket to explore the internet, like a fake but real world where we can and do get lost. Getting lost on the web. Like it's a fact, like 6 hours a day for most people, including myself, mind you. And so I think there's a reason that it's called the internet. You know what a net does? It catches creatures that are dumb enough to enter it. Or the World Wide Web, right? Well, there's a reason that it's called the net, and there's a reason that it's called the web. And it's in this web where we establish our so-called digital identity. And let's break that down too. Digital identity. I mean, the term itself implies that man should adopt a second identity, a digital version of ourselves, a virtual version of ourselves. You know, it's another stab at the divine reality of man's purpose. Because I've mentioned some other perspectives on the mark of the beast a couple minutes ago, and I've acknowledged that the Bible doesn't elaborate on fine details about the mark, but the Bible does describe exactly how the mark will be utilized, and it certainly describes the spirit from which the mark originates, and that's the spirit of the Antichrist. You know, that's the spirit of Antichrist. And as far as how it's going to be utilized, you know, the very first thing it says is that it's going to make it so that you cannot buy or sell unless you have it. I mean, consider our adversary, Lucifer. He hated God with jealousy because he himself desired to be God, and he rebelled against God, and so he was cast down from heaven, you know, with a third of the angels. And understand that Satan hates mankind as well, because we were made in God's image and because God loves us. So Lucifer hates God and he hates man, and he intends to spoil as many souls as he can manage to influence, perhaps to further antagonize God, who desires that all men would seek him. And so Lucifer sets out to deceive man, and what tool does he use to tempt man into sin? Well, the promise of God-like knowledge, the promise that man could be like God. And so man takes the bait, and not just because man was tricked, but because that trick exposed the true desire of man's heart, which was to be like God, just as was the case with Lucifer. And as a result, man fell into a fallen state of sin, subjected to the toils of this fallen world, or a world absent from the presence of God. And man has continued in this tradition ever since. I mean, mankind has continued this fraudulent pursuit of becoming our own gods. And look what's happened. I mean, corporations like Monsanto have run the bulk of organic farmers out of business while replacing our food stock with genetically modified versions of vegetables and fruits that originate from a science lab rather than a farm. And at best, man can only replicate God's creation, and pretty poorly at that. I mean, of course, you got the cloning now, you know, so even living creatures are being created in laboratories these days. Heck, even human beings are being cloned. And what about designer babies or gene editing like CRISPR-Cas9? You know, and the list goes on. So man has continued to pursue the very same lie that was used to lead us into this dump in the first place. And now science is promising immortality. And all you got to do is download your consciousness into a robot body and you're good to go. I mean, I prefer the biblical model of eternal life, but hey, that's just me. But that brings us to the topic of this video, because now man has created a new simulated version of life itself, you know, and it's this digital world, this online digital world, you know, a place where if you want to visit, all you got to do is log in, and you can exist behind the guise of an avatar or a username. And in the dawn of augmented reality, which was sufficiently tested out, by the way, through that stupid Pokemon Go game, people are eager now for these new virtual reality technologies, you know, and the more immersive, the better. And now we've come full circle, back to digital identity, you know, because the push of ID2020 is to acquire a digital/online/virtual or artificial identity from every single breathing human on Earth to be added to the database. Now that idea is concerning enough, but what I find even more disturbing is in the consideration of how this type of plan would be executed. Because how do you go about implementing a plan that involves tagging every person on Earth? And how do you connect the Internet of Things to people without internet access? Well, to find out, you're going to have to join me next time as I conclude my research into these new technologies which seek to transition mankind into a new age. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Signing off, this is Tim for Fallen World Films.